It's time to take a new approach to finding true fulfillment in your career, health, and state of mind through insightful conversations with those who have found their professional and personal passions while achieving balance. Whether it's entrepreneurs, athletes, or healthcare professionals, we bring you real people, real growth right here on the Boost Podcast. Now, here's your host, Elena Lipson.
Hey Boost Squad, and welcome to episode 23. Elena Lipson here, and I'm super excited to introduce today's featured guest, Bob London. Bob, are you ready to join the Boost Squad?
100%, absolutely yes.
So before we dive into today's episode, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Mosaic Growth Partners. Mosaic Growth Partners provides growth strategy consulting to entrepreneurs and organizations in the healthcare and older adult baby boomer market. They can help you bring a new product or service to market, identify and engage new customers and partners, or grow your market share. They also provide coaching and training. For more information, go to mosaicgrowth.com. That's mosaicgrowth.com. Now back to today's featured guest.
Bob is the founder and CEO of Chief Listening Officers, which helps mid-sized B2B tech and professional services firms in the software, SaaS data, financial services, and healthcare sectors really listen to their customers and develop marketing strategies that speak to them. He is a 20-year marketing leader who pioneered the outsourced chief marketing officer concept in 2003 when he founded London Inc., a B2B marketing consultancy. He's worked with and advised and mentored dozens of small and mid-sized companies on their marketing strategy and execution, serving as an interim or part-time CMO. Bob wears a number of other hats as well, including serving as an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Maryland's Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship. He's mentoring and advising numerous startup companies. He speaks at a ton of events, and he publishes the Drive Time marketing video blog, as well as Bobservations, a blog series that looks at the often humorous intersection of business and life. Bob lives in Potomac, Maryland, with his wife and his 2 teenage sons. So much to get into today, Bob. So let's just dive right in.
I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. So what are the 3 things we should know about what it takes to be a chief listening officer and really tune in to what customers are thinking?
That's a great place to start. And it really is kind of my favorite topic is listening, because it's something that doesn't occur enough in business. And I'm not the first one to say that, but I've embraced that a lot, because I think what they get too focused on is telling and talking and promoting and tweeting and pushing messages out at their customers. And what I found, and I've been doing marketing for a long time, I have a lot of battle scars, and I have a lot of, we all have failures, right? And successes, hopefully. And so I think what I've learned is not so much, what's the latest cool way to get your message out on social media? Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. What everything really comes back to is, do you understand what's important from your customer's perspective? Not what you think they should think is important, not what you already built and are trying to sell them. And so the concept of chief listening officers is, of course, I'm able to help companies listen and translate what they hear from customers into a marketing strategy. But the reason I named it chief listening officers, plural, is because I think everyone should really be doing that. And I think not just because I say so, but because I've interviewed about 700 real world decision makers, my clients' customers. And, I think that they have a lot to say. They just haven't been asked the right questions. And they want to improve the buying and selling process. They want their vendors to understand what's really important, but vendors don't seem to take the time to ask the right questions and kind of do it strategically.
Great. So a couple things to follow up on there. You talk about asking the right questions. What are some examples of the right questions that leaders and organizations should be asking?
So I'll give you 3 examples. The first one is a question, and these are all questions that I ask. There are 12 kind of magical, I think, questions that are very insight-provoking, and they're available for free on my website, which we can talk about later. The first question I'll delve into is, what are the 3 priorities? So this is, let's say you're asking a customer, a prospect, or just someone in the target audience. What are the 3 top priorities that you have to update your board of directors on? So what are the 3 things on that board slide that you're focused on? So instead of saying, what's your pain point, which I've come, I think when you ask cliche questions, you get cliche answers, or what keeps you up at night? I think you really get cliche answers. And so by asking something a little more disruptive, they're either going to a board meeting at some point, or they report to someone who reports to someone who's going to a board meeting, and they need to get the update. So that's been very revealing. Those answers have been very revealing because it really gives you insight into what is important from their perspective. And hopefully at some point in the conversation with your customer, you can tie that back to how you can help them. That's one question. The next question is, what are we great at? So what do you think we're great at that we're better than anyone else at? And the reason for that is I hear this over and over again, that buyers, decision makers are really not interested in all the things you can do, all the capabilities, like the proverbial Swiss Army knife. People don't really use Swiss Army knives that often. If you think about it, they use hacksaws and ice picks and all the specific things. So you need to know what your sweet spot is in their mind. If they hesitate or don't have an answer, then you need something you need to work on. But you need to be known for doing something amazingly well as a company or an individual. That's important because it gives you a base from which to build on if you're looking to sell other things on top of what you already sell. The last question, and the killer question, it's just been so amazing in terms of the insights, is what would make you a customer for life? Now, when I talk, to audiences, I kind of let that question hang in the air a little bit because that's what happens when I ask it in interviews, in client conversations, is there's silence. And they'll say, that's a good question, which makes me feel like I'm about to get a good insight. But then they say, no one's ever asked me that before, Bob. And I'll say, okay, well, figuratively or literally, what would make you a customer for life? But when they say no one's ever asked me before, the dichotomy there is we would all love to have customers and clients for as long as they'll stay with us. Why is no one out there asking the question, what would make you a customer for life? What would that look like? What would we have to do? And I don't mean bend over backwards and mow their lawn or whatever. I mean, what's missing from the experience? And that question, the series of questions, leads to this thing that I call discovering the elevator rant. The elevator rant, and I got sick of hearing people talking about, you need to have a better elevator pitch. Elevator pitches are only effective if they address what the other person's problem is or what they're thinking. And I call that the elevator rant. And often by asking questions of customers, you end up being surprised at what's on their mind versus what you thought, their priorities were. So those are some of the questions.
Great. That's so insightful. It gives me a lot to think about too, because when you think about, even if you have a small business, and we've all had a very long, extensive background, usually before going into business for ourselves. And there's a lot of different things you could do, but really thinking about what it is that you're great at. That's an interesting way to look at it instead of thinking, what are all the things I have and how can I use them to serve everyone? And so yes. I love the idea of really playing to your strengths and thinking about what sets you apart and what you're great at. Another thing you mentioned was that you like to think of chief listening officers in the plural. And so I imagine getting an organization to all think about listening often involves a culture change. And so how do you get a company to institute a culture of listening? And can you?
So that's a really good question. And I will say that I will settle for, first of all, the proxy for having a culture of listening is when a company says, we need to revisit how we're doing our marketing and sales. And we'll talk to this guy, Bob London, and he says we should do this listening thing with customers. So we'll do that. That's their culture of listening, such as it is. So the next best proxy is if one person in the organization, my client's organization, says, you know what, Bob's done a great job, or it was good to have an independent perspective listening to our customers, but we need to do this more often. I would like that to happen more. I'd love to tell you that companies embrace the culture of listening. I'll tell you that usually it's like everything else that comes from the top down. If the founder, CEO is out talking to customers on a regular basis, maybe because they have a sales background or maybe because they're enlightened and good listeners, then that's usually how the organization operates. And I think it's just really important to have one very influential person in every organization who represents the customer's perspective. And when I say going to talk to the customer, I don't mean talk. I mean, ask the right questions. And you don't set it up by saying, I'd like to come sell you something. You set it up by saying, I'd love to get your perspective on what's happening in the market and how, I have an email template that I share with people, but, you don't give a big explanation, but you say, hey, we're revisiting our strategy for the next few years, and we want to base it on real human feedback. So that's a hard thing for companies to do. I mean, that's the thing I see the most is the ability to go out and set up conversation. I don't even call them interviews anymore. They're conversations that are kind of agendaless. In other words, it's implied that, if you call one of your clients and say, hey, can we just chat? There's always an implication that either you need something, I'm not talking about you personally. Mm-hmm. You need something, or you want to see if they have any new needs that you can serve, or if there's a problem that needs to be smoothed over, or, they didn't pay their bill, whatever it is. And it's really none of the above when you go out and do this listening exercise. You just have to be able to say, like, I just want to hear what the world looks like from your perspective.
Yep. And when do you think is the ideal time, if you could, in a perfect world, when a company should start listening to their customers?
Yeah. So the ideal time is when things are going well. You're growing, things seem fine. You don't have any big issues hanging over the business. That's a great time to go out and listen to these customer conversations. And the reason I say that is because so that's the ideal time. What typically happens, however, is companies start to recognize that they have a problem where someone internally or someone externally like me says, we need to go get the customer's perspective into this conversation. We can't decide what's important for the business until we find out what they think. That's the reality. The problem with that is oftentimes it becomes more emotional for the chief listener, if you will, because they're under duress that they need to turn things around. There are problems that are already showing up in the numbers of the business. Revenue is falling short of goals, and salespeople aren't hitting quotas, and the marketing campaigns are terrible, and they're not getting leads, or whatever. That's not the ideal time, but that is the time when most companies react and say, we need to do something different here.
Yeah. And so when you look at how organizations are getting customer feedback and insights, what do you see now and in the future?
Well, what I see now is a lot of companies saying so there's some sort of clinical marketing terminology out there. I'll just say I'm a huge critic of marketing in general. That doesn't mean I'm a self-hating marketer. It just means I think marketing sometimes tends to overcomplicate things. So there's there's sort of theory out there called the voice of the customer. And I get it. I mean, I think what that signifies is important. The fact that they had to name it something. I'm surprised it doesn't all have alliterative, like, like the 4 Ps of marketing. It had to be 4 Ps. So what happens now is someone says, we need a better messaging on our website, or we need better sales messaging, or a value proposition. It's another marketing term. And what they're really saying is that sales isn't going well. Sales aren't going well. The salespeople are kind of all over the map. And what they do is, in response to that, they'll say, well, let's have a meeting. Who's in the meeting? All people that already work there, all people that have a vested interest in their job, not taking the blame for the bad value proposition or the elevator pitch. And so that's the primary thing is mostly it's an in-house exercise. And that's what got me. 15 years ago, I was working for a company, a very well-known global company. We were discussing sort of the product development and product marketing of an overseas product. So it was something that would be used by people in Asia. And I'll just say it was in the internet space. It was a small business consumer product in Asia that was in language. So in other words, it wasn't in English. The product was itself, by definition, in other languages. And no one had any of the answers. No, in this meeting, this brainstorming session. And we were sitting this was in Sterling, Virginia, and it was like on the 8th or 9th floor of a building. And I looked out and I just said to everybody, I don't think us 5 Caucasian people in this room, can solve this without actually getting outside the building and talking to customers. And I wish I could say that there was a Hollywood moment where everyone stood up and the angels sang and the heavens parted and people said, you're right. The product turned out to be a disaster. And there were some practical issues. There was no one in charge of going to Asia and interviewing customers and finding out how the world worked, So it was a complete disaster. But that's the tendency to try and solve it internally because people want quick solutions in marketing and in business. They don't want to wait to have to sit down and arrange appointments with customers. They don't want to have customers. Sometimes they don't want to hear what customers have to say or they're nervous. So I think people get insights by guessing and assuming certain things about their customers without going to talk to them. Surveys are okay. Surveys are generally, though, not as sensitive enough of a tool to actually go in and have a human conversation where I've found you can pursue something they said. So a survey is already a biased tool, right? Whoever wrote the survey and whoever approved it is saying, this is what we want to find out. And the person filling out the survey then becomes task-oriented. They have to get through it. They have to check 20 boxes. They're not really thinking about each answer. When I talk to my clients' customers, they have to think about it because I'm probing and I'm asking questions that make them think about it. So that's my sweet spot, if you will. And again, I've kind of come to that after, more than 2 decades of marketing successes and failures and seeing that the common thing is the companies that understand sort of their customer's perspective are the ones that grow, and the other ones are the ones that kind of struggle, maybe grow a little bit, maybe go backwards.
Yeah, I think what you said about guessing and assuming is really interesting. So I work mostly in the healthcare and the baby boomer space, and a lot of entrepreneurs there start companies that are born out of their own personal experiences with the healthcare system or caring for a loved one. And so they take their own experience, and a lot of times they think because they've gone through it that their experience probably translates to a broader market. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. And they don't go out and talk to the customers because they think that because they went through it, they already know, what all the customers are going to want. And I see it being a critical mistake that a lot of companies and entrepreneurs make by not actually going out and talking and listening to other customers and only having that tunnel vision of their own experience. So really like what you're saying there.
Can I just give you 2 sound bites on that?
Yep.
One of them is, and I keep forgetting to find out to whom this quote is attributed, don't fall in love with your solution, fall in love with their problem so you can really understand their problem first. Then you can come up with the best solution. The other thing is that I gave a talk late last year called You Are Not Your Customer. So that was the phrase has stuck in my head. And it really did, I think, from what the feedback I got, it helped the audience think about, I guess we are kind of guessing and assuming an awful lot here. And maybe that's why things aren't going the way we want them to go in marketing and sales.
Yeah, I love those sound bites. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your business. Can you give us 3 tactics for how you've grown your business? Obviously, you've had that aha moment at some point that companies weren't listening to customers enough, but talk to us about how you went from that moment to growing your business.
Yeah, so about 6 years ago, so I'm self-employed, right? So I always joke that I could do whatever I want as long as I make a certain amount of money to take care of, whatever, family and the future. So every summer almost for a number of years, I would kind of take a step back and go through a thought process and say, am I doing and this was inspired by a book by a guy named Michael Port called Book Yourself Solid. And I'll explain that. If I forget to explain it, I'm sure you'll remind me, hopefully. I actually, one summer, about 6 years ago, went around, and I call it my planes, trains, and automobiles. I went around and had conversations with people who knew me really well professionally. Sometimes the relationship had transcended, we had become friends. They were people that I trusted, people I knew would be candid. And I said to them, it's one of the questions I gave you before, is there something you think I'm great at? And I wasn't asking from a bad place. I was looking to see what they would say and then decide what to do with the information. So, candidly, there were a few things they didn't mention that I thought I was great at, but that's the whole point of the exercise, is to get a perspective that you may not have yourself. And what they told me was, that it was this sort of combination of, sort of executive level marketing experience, but also this kind of sort of empathy, the ability to get a perspective that is unique and unusual, that connects to what people really need or want. And so it sounded pretty good to me. And so I really started at that point every marketing strategy engagement with a series of conversations with my clients' customers. I kind of insisted on it and said, you don't know, you may not know what their perspective is. I certainly don't. And the only tiebreaker is going to be asking your customers. And so that turned out to just be and the good news was I love doing that kind of work. And that was the Michael Port thing, Book Yourself Solid, where part of his book talks about just identify what type of work you're doing and which clients that engage you and satisfy you the most, and then fire all the other ones. Love
that.
So like most people, I was not in a position to fire a bunch of clients. And I already had, it wasn't like I had clients that I didn't like. It wasn't the issue. It was this idea of what's the most engaging and satisfying work you're doing. So all these things aligned, and it was kind of a perfect storm. I enjoy I'm curious. So I enjoy talking to people about their business. I seem to be, again, according to other people's feedback, my sweet spot is getting to the truth of what people are really talking about. And the work was a higher value work that I was able to really charge more. So basically my income doubled doing that work. And I would say that if there are marketing consultants in your audience, that one of the things that they can do, and I hate to throw around numbers, but if you hire a marketing consultant at in the DC area who's doing some strategy and execution, I've seen people charge anywhere from $100 to $200, maybe $250 an hour, not the really senior people, but just kind of the general group. And you can easily double that by going in and saying, as a marketing consultant, say, look, let's take a step back. Do we really know the truth about what our customers need and think? Yes or no? And I had that same conversation with people who are in corporate marketing departments. You need to go out and talk to customers. You need to be as intimate with their needs, because when the sales team and the product team comes in and says, we need to do this, 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 and this, you have to be able to counter that or balance that with, okay, well, here's what we're hearing in marketing. Now, better yet, what you're hearing in the marketing team by talking to customers should be used to drive and kind of influence where the company is headed. There aren't very many marketing departments that successfully do that.
Yeah, very interesting. So tell us about a time when you've stagnated or stopped making progress. I'm sure it hasn't been a smooth journey from, when you started to realize how important it was to listen to customers. I don't know if you hit a roadblock when you started to raise your prices or if there was some other time.
So it's interesting. Plenty of speed bumps. I think I'm going to go way back. So I actually started consulting. I worked for a big Fortune 500 company, and I had a huge advertising budget, $200 million that I was running. And, I had a sequence of jobs there in the telecommunications industry, and I didn't really have a plan for myself. And I will say definitely I'm a late bloomer. I think I was hitting some ceilings in terms of the way people perceived me, that, I kind of created some limitations for myself with the way I interacted with people, the way I didn't enjoy managing people. I didn't realize that, but I just wasn't good at it. I certainly wasn't good at managing up, stepped in a lot of, puddles and worse. And so that led me to at one point just say, and, we all had, very generous financial packages. And so one day I kind of quit, and I had just bought a house in DC, and I said, this would be a cool place to work out of my house. Doing what? I don't know. And what I didn't realize, and it went fine, I knew I had a network and I got business, but I didn't know how to make the most of it. I literally did not really leave the house. So I had to learn at heart, I'm a very introverted person. I had to learn by necessity to go out and market myself. It was not something I had anticipated. You would think as a marketing consultant, I would have known that. And that's something I see a lot is consultants and other people, or maybe someone who is thinking about consulting, they get referred to me and they say, well, how much of your job is kind of business development and marketing yourself? And I go, 30, 40%. Well, that doesn't leave much time for billing. Yes, it does. You'll be fine, but you have to commit to it. Now, the truth is, I tell them 30 or 40%, it may be less than that, but I want them to know that the marketing piece of it, whether it's publishing online or networking or having coffee with people, which is something that, I started doing, is the stuff that makes sense. And I have to give credit to my wife. So I was out there consulting, working out of my house in Cleveland Park that I had just bought, and I met this woman who became my wife. And along the way, I went to work for one of my clients during the big internet bubble it was before the first internet bubble, 1997 or whatever it was. So I took a full-time job. I left consulting. And after a few years of running marketing for this company, it was very successful. I took another job with a startup. It lasted 8 months. And I said to her, I said to my wife, I've never been as satisfied as when I was consulting. And she said, well, the only way you can do that again, she wasn't giving me permission, but maybe she was. Maybe she was saying, you can't do it the same way you did it before, where you just kind of wait for business to come in. She said, you really have to market yourself differently. And I kind of knew that, and hearing it from her, that really helped, because I knew that I would be accountable. Now, since then, I've gone through periods where, because of being busy, I haven't done as much marketing as I should. That always comes back to bite me 3 months later, 6 months later, whatever. And in one sense, I don't have to have a big sales pipeline because I have a number I need to hit, but I don't have office space. So I don't have I always think of the mafia, like you have a number you need to pay every month and it's very unforgiving. I don't have employees and I set it up that way intentionally, but I still have those responsibilities. And I think having kids too is a wake up call where you go, they look really hungry. Maybe I should go out and hunt for some business. And I'm kidding, of course. And I think even as recently as a couple of years ago, again, thinking that, okay, I can coast for a while. And I'm just being very, honest about this.
Yeah.
Things are great. Everyone knows me. They kind of know what I do. I get referrals. I don't have to do my routine. Guess what? It's not like that. There is no coasting. And there might be for some people at the top of the food chain. And I think I've been there at different times, but you just can't stop. You really can't stop. And I don't say that in a way that's punishing. I mean, you have to find what works for you in terms of marketing yourself and your business so that it doesn't feel onerous. Then a lot of business owners get to a point where they've been successful building the business and they say, we need to hire someone to do sales. And that first sales hire is very difficult because that new hire can almost never capture or replicate the spirit and authenticity of the founder. And so that's a tough thing. You have to go through one or two people before you kind of figure it out. I've seen businesses that have gone through that cycle and it doesn't work out. And they go back to saying, all right, well, I'm the CEO and founder. I'm going to have to do business development. And that's fine. But someone else has to take on these other 4 responsibilities like operations. So it's a very interesting journey and just something I've seen people go through, repeatedly.
Yeah, I relate to so much of what you're saying. 2 points I really want to revisit for a moment. So one is you talked about how when you were in corporate America, you kind of reached a ceiling and a limit that you may have imposed on yourself. And I think a lot of people that go into business for themselves find that as well. You run into kind of the same feelings of frustration over and over again and the same things that annoy you. I know that happened for me. And sometimes, you might not be thinking long term. This was always my plan to go off in business for myself. But like you, I kind of had just reached my breaking point and went off and did it. And
right.
Like you, I also haven't been as satisfied anywhere else as I have been working for myself and consulting. And so if you are feeling that frustration and just it's not a right fit for you where you're at now, don't feel stuck. You can, take the leap and try something else. The other point that you bring up that I see a lot, even with people who are in marketing and business development, a lot of people do not feel comfortable tooting their own horn and selling themselves. I watch people that do such great work and they think that the work will speak for itself. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. You have to get out there and find a way to market yourself and sell yourself to people. And I've seen it especially with women that they are not comfortable doing that. I have a lot of friends who work in communications and PR and branding, and then they go to look for new jobs. And I look at their resume and they haven't been able to articulate in any sort of meaningful, differentiated way what they do. And I'm like, you're a marketing person. How come you're not selling yourself here?
Yeah. The cobbler's children sometimes have no shoes.
Yeah.
I think that's very true. And I think this idea of what am I great at is something that, and I do get, look, I mean, marketing it can be a very transient occupation. So I do get a lot of calls and referrals from people they're about to leave their company or they're being asked to leave or they're out on the street looking for their next gig. And I always ask them, I just wrote about this yesterday or the day before. I always ask them, what do you think you're great at? What's your sweet spot? And, people really, they can't articulate it. What they tend to do is revert to listing things that capabilities. Like I'm really good with Salesforce.com. I'm good at that. But, there's 2 things about that. First of all, they should be talking about results in marketing, which is usually quantifiable. But the other thing is they have to really know, I think, in order for them to be happy moving forward, they have to identify, instead of saying, well, I'm just looking for anything right now, or let's talk about an industry, let's talk about a job function, let's talk about something that energizes you and start there.
Yep.
And if they struggle with that, I tell them the same thing. I'll say, you really should go ask 3 or 4. It doesn't matter what I think your sweet spot is or what you think it is. Go ask 5 or 6 people that you really trust. And that tends to be an eye-opening moment for people that, oh yeah, I can, I was deathly afraid to find out what other people thought of me. That's just my makeup. And that's a mistake. Yep. That's a mistake. Yep. And you have to go out and it's not for everybody. I think there are people who are they're either not self-aware enough or too self-aware that they already kind of know or they've assumed what they're great at. But I encourage people to go have those conversations and get other people's perspectives, Yeah. And there's literally no downside to it.
Yeah, I agree. So we've talked a lot about work. Tell us sort of how you take time to care for yourself.
Care for myself. I do go to the gym now, something that I have done sporadically over the years, but I've become better about that. I'm going tomorrow. I'm not sure I take care of myself that well. I'm going down to Florida tomorrow. So I'm from Baltimore. I'm a big Baltimore Orioles fan. And I'm going to spring training to watch them play. And my older son is meeting me there and my nephew's me. So I'm not sure, other than our wedding, and we happen to be Jewish, so we've had 2 bar mitzvahs. And other than looking forward to those things, this is something I look forward to like a child almost.
Yeah.
Like, dress up in my Orioles shirt and hat. And I do writing. It's not therapeutic. I mean, I do it for business, but I also, you mentioned before, the Bobservations blog. I always was called a creative person by other people. And, and I guess I had some good test results academically when I was growing up on the verbal side of things. And there was something about clever, creative, whatever. And I started writing down observations mostly about business and life, the intersection of business and life. And at one point I would send out my company email every so often, a newsletter. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to send out one of these articles that I wrote just for myself. And the reaction was so positive. And I haven't even sent them out in probably 4 years. And people still ask me, like, when's the next Bobservations? Hey, Mr. Bobservations. So it stuck with people. And that gave me a lot of, first of all, it was good for business because people were like, he's clever and he's creative and he has a unique perspective on things. But I got a lot out of it. I just really got out a lot. And it was published a couple times in a couple different magazines. And that's one of my pursuits.
So lots of great insights here today, Bob. But let's go ahead and close with a parting piece of guidance for us.
The standard advice is start putting money away for retirement early. My parents told me that and I never listened. So I would say that, look, we've talked about the listening thing in a business context. I would say that there's sort of a broader societal need for listening and empathy. And, people, they aren't really listening to each other at all. They're very entrenched in their views. They're scared. I really think that whether it's a relationship or politics or work or whatever, just stop. So I'm working on a book. It's called Shut Up and Listen. So I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say it more gently. Just take a step back, take a breath, try to hear what the other person is saying. And if you do that, first of all, it might enlighten you. And second of all, there's a chance they'll do that as well.
Yep. So think about when you can be more empathetic and listen better, not just at work, but also in life. So I hope today's episode inspires you to think more about how you can find your passion and live your best life. For more information, including links to resources that Bob and I chatted about today and how best to get in touch with him, head on over to our website, theboostpodcast.com, and check out our show notes from the episode and catch the Boost bonus. So Bob, I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us today. And remember, anything is possible for you.
Now that you've completed this episode, the next step is to join the Boost Squad for strategic insights, tips, and tricks, as well as exclusive resources designed specifically to accelerate your personal and professional growth. All this and more is waiting for you at theboostpodcast.com.